Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Okay, so this is part 2 of Saturn transits. Saturn square Sun, Moon, Mercury, or Venus. My video cut out earlier, so this is part 2. Now, I finished talking about transiting Saturn square the Moon, so I'm going to now move on to Saturn square Mercury. Some of the comments I think are going to sound very similar because we are talking about Saturn, you know. Saturn's energy is Saturn's energy. So whatever planet it's touching, forming a relationship to via an aspect, it's about understanding, first of all, it's about understanding what Saturn means, what it brings, what it does. It's archetypal force and energy. And then obviously the planet that it's actually affecting. So Saturn is Saturn. It's always going to be Saturn. It's always going to produce these very challenging periods, you know, that are connected to all the things that I mentioned in the previous video. I don't want to be repetitive and mention them again. So please watch the first part to this video if you haven't, okay, in order to just get more information about Saturn. But moving on to Saturn square Mercury, again, that's you know, the square is fundamentally a dynamic, tension-provoking energy, which is internal. It always begins internally. A square is an internal energy, okay? So what's Mercury? Mercury is the function of your mind. It's the function of your mind in the form of how you think, how you communicate, your ideas, you know, how you share your ideas, how you share knowledge, you know, all that sort of stuff. So the written and spoken word in all the various forms that is expressed and experienced, that's Mercury. So, you know, when you have Saturn squaring Mercury, we're talking about Saturn coming in and influencing our mind function. And really, more specifically, we're talking about the lower mind, which is the left brain. And when we say lower, it doesn't mean, it's not a negative, expression. It's just simply, we have a lower mind and we have a higher mind. That's just how it is. And Mercury rules the left brain, lower mind. So, you know, that's very much to do with, as I said, you know, how we communicate, how we speak, how we learn, you know, study. Mercury is also siblings as well. It represents our siblings. So, yeah. So, if you have Mercury square Saturn, you will experience, and again, this will likely be a triple transit, which usually lasts for about 12 months. That's very typical. So, it's a period of mental constructions. Deconstructing, if you like. So there's a lot of challenges with regards to the verbal and written word. So the world of ideas, language, communication, the ability to express your own ideas, to communicate what you wish to communicate, undergoes a pretty challenging period. So you know. First of all, internally within your own self, there can be a sense of extreme frustration because you're struggling to actually communicate what you want to you know what you're thinking, you know what you want to communicate, you know what you want to say, but there's an inherent sense of struggle, challenge, block, limitation, fear, and all of that produces potentially a lot of negative mental constructs. So, you know, there's a sense of feeling negative, pessimistic on that mental level. It starts to, you know, shrink how we kind of mentally view things. So there's this sense of feeling very limited in your speech, your vocal ability, your throat chakra. So, like I said, it's not that you don't know what you want to communicate, but there's an inherent sense of struggle and challenge when you try to do so. And the way that usually shows up is that when you do try to communicate, and you do try to express yourself to another person, or to a group of people, or whatever the case, there's this sense of feeling blocked. You know, it's kind of like you go to say something and the other person interrupts you, or takes over the conversation, or doesn't listen to you, or makes harsh judgments about what you're actually trying to say or what you're trying to share. So there's this inherent sense of mental struggle going on, and it can really cloud your mental conceptual sphere with a lot of negative thinking. So negative thinking is the key word, I think, here with Mercury square Saturn. So just be aware that if you are going through this, again, this will pass, but it is about actually learning to take a step back. You know, with Saturn transits, there's always a very there's a strong need to be able to be patient, because nothing moves quickly with Saturn, and a year is not a really long time, but it's certainly long enough to feel a sense of disconnection or pain or suffering. You know, if you suffer for one day, if you have one day of deep suffering, it feels like a lifetime, doesn't it? So imagine a year. It's pretty tough, okay? So communication challenges, essentially. If there's some any kind of deals that you're making on a contractual basis, whether it's through your work or through other personal matters or other business matters, be aware and be mindful that there will be delays and there will be blockages as they appear. So again, it's about being really, really patient and trying to take a step inside and actually trying to make sense of what needs to be deconstructed here, because it can be outmoded perceptions and thoughts, what styles and ways of thinking, of seeing things that need to be changed here. That's what, you know, that's what Saturn brings up. It brings up what needs to be deconstructed. But it is, look, Saturn square Mercury is a really challenging transit as well, just as the Sun square Saturn is, and just as the Moon squaring Saturn is as well. Mercury is a different experience though, because it's all to do with the mental function, but I think that it's again just as hard as the Sun and the Moon, just in its own unique way, because you're talking about the mind, and let's face it, our mind is going all the time, isn't it? I mean, even when we're sleeping, you know, consciousness is still, you know, it's still operating. Things are still flooding through, and either being cleared out or being intensified, or whatever the case. You know, they say that we have over 60,000 thoughts entering our mind daily. That's a lot of thoughts. So the problem with that is that if we're not paying attention to the thoughts that are coming in, because the thoughts are just, they're just coming in, just like the clouds do in the sky, and they set into our emotional body if we don't discriminate and have some awareness around what we're actually allowing in. And with Mercury square Saturn, there's a really a heavy sense of mental burden, you know. So depression, again, is a very typical experience, because you're talking about the mind, and the depression is most certainly connected to our thoughts, because it is our thoughts that is then connected to how we feel. So there's all these, nothing is separate, everything is connected. So Mercury square Saturn is, yeah, it's a really tough time, but again, it's just about seeing it through and seeing what is not valid anymore in terms of your mental constructs about yourself and about life, and essentially what needs to be cleared out. But you know, yeah, just be aware that it is a mentally tough time and a mentally challenging time, and you know, don't be surprised if you have really challenging conversations with people. Conversations won't flow. There's not a sense of ease or flow there. You will feel a sense of feeling blocked or inhibited or unable to really communicate what you need to express. So it is a very challenging transit. Moving on to Saturn square Venus. Okay, Saturn square Venus is clearly, Venus is about relationships. It's how you relate and share yourself with another. It's all the components of enjoyment in life. You know, it's what we, it's the pleasures. Venus is all about pleasure, as much as she is describing the world of our relationships. Venus is a magnetic principle, so she draws and attracts, you know, whatever it is she wants. And Venus, whatever sign your Venus is in, will describe how you draw and attract relationships in your life, people in your life, and how you share and love, you know, in your relationships. When Saturn comes in, I've seen this many times over. Relationships typically tend to break down, because what happens is, you know, Venus is that luscious, moist, fluid sort of energy, and Saturn is hard, cold, and dry. So, you know, Venus is the pleasures, the love, the idealistic components of relationships and relating, our ideals, you know, what we wish to, how we wish to be pleased and so forth. Saturn comes in and it cools all that off. So the passion cools off, the sex cools off, the sensual world cools off. It's not a nice transit at all, actually. So if you're if you're having an affair, a love affair, I'm not saying an affair as in having, you know, a couple of different relationships. I'm just talking about if you're in a love affair. What happens when Saturn comes in, it suddenly, you can see now a very different relationship before you or in front of you. So the lenses of how you see relationships changes when Saturn comes into contact with Venus via a square. So yeah, challenges and tension and difficulty in relationships if you're in them, and if you're not in them, unlikely to start a relationship this time. But then again, on the other hand, you could say it is likely. But I guess some of the typical things that I see when someone starts a relationship under a Venus-Saturn transit, it'll be a very serious relationship. Saturn rules everything that is serious, so it'll be a responsible, practical relationship that you feel is giving you some sense of structure and security in your life. So it doesn't have the fun stuff. It doesn't have the juicy, fun, sensual components of it. So it may even start off as a sexless sort of connection and relationship, but that can come later. You know, so you know, relationships can start in very different ways, and that is often seen through what's happening to Venus in your birth chart. So Saturn Venus relationships are, you know, they're, as I said, they're not the love, luscious, lustful, passionate types. Quite the opposite. Finances can be really challenging at this time as well, because Venus is a planet that is very much associated with our finances and our own sort of sense of self-worth and security as well. So self-worth, yeah, self-worth is a big one, because Venus rules that. Venus rules the second house in the birth chart. The second house is the Taurus house, which is all about our own sense of self-worth. And, you know, bring Saturn into the picture, you might feel that your own sort of self-worth doesn't feel as good during this time. You know, you don't feel as loving or as loved as you want to be, or maybe you don't feel as beautiful as you normally do. You don't feel as glamorous as you normally do. The Venusian part of you is clouded by by Saturn's hard, cold energy. So it's not a pleasant transit, but you know, it can actually, on the positive, because we always have to bring in the positive, because it is there. It's just hard to feel it and hard to see it and hard to understand it when you're actually going through this transit. But when you come out the other end, hopefully what you can see very clearly is you've learnt something new about yourself and your own self-worth. You've learnt something new about relationship styles and how you relate in relationships and partners, and there's a lot of deconstructing that's gone on with that. So you find yourself feeling more renewed in the sense of the world of relationships and how you enter them, and what you value, because Venus is what you value within your own self, of course, and then certainly what you value in others as well. So all these components undergo a very difficult period, and again, depression can come into it, because if Saturn Venus can make one feel quite lonely and isolated as well, much like the Saturn Sun has that component too, and the Saturn Moon. So if you're not in a relationship, you may feel extra lonely, extra isolated, because you feel cut off from that Venusian Venus relating principle, magnetic energy in your life. You're feeling isolated from it, cut off, unable to connect with it. You try, and it's very difficult to make it happen. As I said, the positive way that this can manifest in terms of creating a relationship during this time is that you maybe you start the very important foundations of a relationship, and it's always going to be a serious thing. It's as I said, Saturn is not fun stuff. It's not fifth house Leo. It's not party time. It's not love affairs. It's serious hard work. So the other thing is also, if you're in a relationship, and maybe your relationship is at a point where it does need to take that next serious level, that next level, because relationships have phases. No relationship stays the same. They have phases within themselves. So certain things are outgrown, certain things are grown, and so on and so forth. Saturn square Venus can be that you are now ready to move into that next zone of a more serious commitment, let's say. But that's going to require both of you being on the same page. And if you're not, then the result of this will be that one person will feel too suffocated. They want more freedom, and the other person wants more commitment. So there's this inherent sort of tension with those very different needs and viewpoints of where the relationship is at. So that's just another typical example that I've seen. Okay, I think that's enough for today. What I want to also just briefly mention to you guys is I've talked about midpoints very briefly in another video, and I just want to bring it up again now, because midpoints are so extremely powerful. They truly, truly are. I have a really good example. It's not good, but it's a powerful example in my own life at the moment, with transiting Saturn at a very important midpoint in my own chart. So Saturn is not doing major things transit-wise yet with personal planets in my chart. It will do next year, because I'm an Aries, so Saturn will square my Sun, square Mercury, and all this stuff. But there is a really potent midpoint at the moment. So what it is this: transiting Saturn at the moment is squaring my Moon Neptune midpoint. That's something that a lot of people won't even think about, won't even consider. If you don't work with midpoints, you wouldn't even know about it. I do work with midpoints because I find them really powerful, and there can be a content, a level of information, a whole layer, a whole field of experience that can be totally overlooked and missed if you don't actually work with midpoints. So I want to read you what Saturn, if Saturn is at your Moon Neptune midpoint, this is what it produces, and it's not nice. Okay. Pessimism, hopelessness, and despair. The tendency to be influenced strongly by the prevailing and temporary circumstances, the suffering of the soul, pathological states, of depression, the tendency to feel inhibited, frustrated, or paralyzed. Now, I can tell you, I have felt all those things since this transit midpoint started for me, which was, it started just in the last few weeks. So, this is where I'm reading from. Combination of Stellar Influences by Reinhold Overton. This is the best book on midpoints, in my opinion. I've said it before and I'll say it again because it just simply is. For some people, it might feel, you know, a little bit heavy and might feel negative in certain ways, but it's extremely realistic. Because life is not, you know, a bunch of roses and flowers everywhere. Life is, in this 3D reality, is very challenging. It is very difficult. It is very hard. It is very beautiful. It is very loving. We live in a world of duality, so we're experiencing, you know, a vastness, an ocean of, you know, multiple layers of things going on. And this is what I love about astrology. It can, you know, bring to life very literally a powerful understanding of all these different facets of the world of duality that we encounter. And it's not set in stone. Things can be worked with at very high frequency levels. It always comes down to our own level of consciousness and awareness. Sometimes there's a bunch of difficult things going on though, so even though somebody has, you know, a lot of awareness, a lot of consciousness, they've done a lot of personal development, a lot of inner work and so forth, depending on what's going on in a person's life, they can still experience the extreme harshness of Saturn transits. So there's something to be really said for midpoints, and really powerful midpoints, with certain planets hitting those midpoints. So you can miss that altogether if you're not aware of midpoints. So just wanted to share that with you guys, because I think that that's really useful in my opinion. So there you have it. That's Saturn squaring Sun, Mercury, Venus, Moon, and just one example of transiting Saturn on a powerful midpoint in my own chart. You could be having this yourself, so have a look into it and see if that is the case. Look, you know, I can certainly talk about Saturn squaring all the other planets as well, and, you know, perhaps I'll do that at a later stage. There's so much, you know. I can do Saturn in combination with other aspects to the planets as well, because each aspect is very different to the next, and it produces different results. But today I was inspired to talk about Saturn square, the inner personal planets up to Venus. Hopefully that's been helpful for you. If you have any comments and questions, please write them below. I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can. And if you want to have a personal reading, if you're going through, you know, some tough things at the moment, maybe having a reading can give you some answers and some guidance, and a bit of faith and hope, and a bit of a glimpse into some light if you're going through a bit of a dark time. We all go through dark times, and the light is still always there, but it's very difficult to see it when we're in that darker sort of field and sphere, which feels like it's imposed on us by this external 3D reality. And it's real. When it's happening, it's real. It's not imaginary. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this is helpful, and see you soon. Thanks. Bye.